Do you have imaginary conversations with yourself? If you do, you're not crazy. And in today's episode of The Tie-Dyed Therapist, I want to talk about 4 different ways to handle imaginary conversations. So stay tuned. Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Richard Killian. What do I mean by imaginary conversations? Well, I wrote a booklet that came with the card deck, and the topic of imaginary conversations has come up over the years with clients, and it actually started with something that I discovered about myself, and that was many times I would find myself having a conversation with somebody in my head that I thought I was going to have a conflict with. And it got very negative. And I was always thinking about the perfect zinger, the thing that I really wanted to say. And it was always very negative and sometimes rather nasty. And one day I was telling a friend about this conversation I was having with somebody. And she said to me, "When you're having the conversation with this person, are they in the room with you?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, then why are you having the conversation?" It was such a simple comment to make, but yet it really sort of opened my eyes into what I was doing. I was literally setting the stage up for a negative interaction with somebody before it had even happened. And so I got very careful over the years about trying not to do that. It's still a habit, but I work on it a lot because I've noticed that when I go negative on somebody, even if it's in my head, eventually I regret it. I regret it in so many different ways. So I wrote this booklet to accompany the cards, and I put in the topic of imaginary conversations. And that was the description that I had, which is about not going negative and not creating the stage for something bad to happen in an interaction that you're going to have with somebody. But there are 3 other ways to look at this. Now, I had a coach a couple of years ago who was trained in the Silva method. And what he pointed out to me when I talked about imaginary conversations was that you didn't have to go negative, you could actually go positive. So in other words, when you anticipate something going wrong or you fear something's going to happen in a conversation with somebody, you could instead turn it around and start thinking about what would be the most pleasant outcome I could expect from this conversation. What could I possibly say that would help matters rather than hurt matters? How could I make this a positive experience for both people? And that is a very valid way of handling imaginary conversations. I did try that a couple times. It actually worked. And then I was thinking about, are there other ways to look at this topic of imaginary conversations? And I realized that sometimes people, their default is negative, and they're just not used to doing things in a positive way. So if people can't really fathom doing it in a positive way, then maybe they could do it in a more neutral way. So in other words, when you start out in your head having this conversation with somebody, you might want to try to switch it from positive to neutral so that you're not putting in anything negative, you're not putting anything positive into it, you're just sort of accepting the situation as it is. It almost kind of bespeaks about narrative therapy, right? Where we focus on the problem and not the person. When we focus on the problem instead of the person, we sort of take that trigger out. We make it less hot. because we're simply trying to problem solve now. We're not trying to, insult somebody or treat somebody poorly or degrade them in any way. So you could either do it positive, you could do it negative, you could do a neutral. Now the fourth way, which is a more mindfulness way of handling it, has to do with trying to accept things the way they are and not trying to anticipate an outcome. In other words, we don't know what's going to happen in this situation. We still have to have the conversation with the person. And we don't know what they bring to the table. We don't know any of this stuff about what's going on in their life, how they view the problem, how they want to solve the problem, what they think of us. They could be having their own imaginary conversation, frankly. And so this is probably the harder approach, because what it means is to let go of some of the control you want to have in the situation. That's really what this card is about. It's about the release of control, or the assumption that you have control over a situation. In reality, you can have all the imaginary conversations in the world that you want, but the thing is, they never play out the way that you think they're going to. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to construct a conversation in my head, know exactly what I'm going to say to somebody, thinking that I am completely prepared for what's going to happen. And then I have the conversation with the person, and none of it plays the way that I thought it would. That has happened almost universally to me all the time. So my advice to you is to try different ways of handling this other than the negative default method. Try the Silva method way of doing it more positively. Try doing it in a more neutral way. Try not doing it at all. Seeing what kind of result that you get and what resonates better for you. Because after all, it's your conversation. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.